Feelings are everywhere, and they impact us. In these two stories, first we had Jesus and this death of Lazarus, and there were feelings. There were anger, there was grief, there was disbelief, all kinds of things, and Jesus was feeling it. And in this scene where the Pharisees bring this woman caught in adultery, there are feelings. There's anger at her, there's judgment, there's shame, there is anger at Jesus and fear of Jesus, and all in the midst, Jesus is navigating feelings. Well, and that's because he's human as well as we are. We feel feelings. We feel our feelings, and we feel other people's feelings. And if you don't think that, just remember a time when somebody yelled at you, and you felt their feelings. But also remember about smiles. When people smile at you, it's reflexive. You can't help but to smile. Or a game that we used to play growing up on road trips is Make Mom Yawn. We can make Mom yawn just by yawning. And she couldn't help it. It's this thing that we have in our brains called mirror neurons. There are these neurons in our brain that are conditioned at a very young age, usually by our moms or our dads. The feelings that they expressed, the smiles that they gave us, the looks of concern, they begin to shape an emotional response within us. If we were yelled at a lot when we were kids, that also makes us more sensitive to yelling and anger. But they create a system that we call empathy within us. And it's a lot of things. Empathy is a lot of things, but at its very basic level, it is just physiological. It is just that feeling you have when you see pain in another person, you feel it. You see the joy of another person, you want to be a part of it. That's empathy at a very basic level. And it has been programmed in us from a very young age by how the world responds to us. Most of us have a healthy, natural level of empathy, depending upon our parents' emotional lives. We usually have their emotional lives. So we feel that. And the question is what do we do with that empathy? And do we have the emotional health to support empathy? See, there's healthy empathy. And healthy empathy is feeling what others are feeling without losing one's own sense of well-being. So you can feel that someone's angry. I see that you're angry. You can feel that someone is sad. I feel that you're sad. And that helps you to connect with them by recognizing their feelings. But if you carried everybody's feelings around with you all the time, it will be overwhelming. And that's what happens. That's what's happening in the world today. We're feeling feelings that we don't even know where they came from. We just know we're upset about it. Well, if you watch an angry person on the TV all the day, you're going to feel like they feel. And so there's this thing that is happening, I think, to maybe all of us on some level because of all the feelings of this last year compiled upon all the feelings you already have in your life. And it's called compassion fatigue. You've maybe heard this, compassion fatigue. It's also known as secondary traumatic stress. It is a condition characterized by a gradual lessening of compassion over time. And scholars who study compassion fatigue note that the condition is common among workers who work directly with victims of disasters, trauma, or illness, especially in the healthcare industry. I don't know if you have any healthcare workers in your family or friendships, but they are experiencing compassion fatigue. They are worn out. They have no more to give emotionally because of the situation with COVID. It is very difficult, and they're struggling to be able to care. It's not that they don't care, it's that they're losing the ability to care. And it's so essential for all of our lives to be able to care. But we get worn out. Now, compassion fatigue is not just a sign that a person is dealing too much with traumatized people, but that they have also neglected their own self-care. We're giving and giving and giving, but what are we receiving? Are we taking time for ourselves? Are we recognizing the Sabbath to recharge our batteries, having a day off? Is there someone in your life that listens to you? Do you take time in solitude and pray, or just be alone and breathe? And if we don't take care of ourselves, then we will begin to withdraw from experiencing the feelings of others, and even our own feelings, just for the sake of survival. This is what happens to so many people that experience grief. We don't want to experience the grief, and so we put it aside. But my friends, grief will come back, and it will show up in other feelings. Like for me, if I don't express my sadness, I experience anxiety. And I have a friend that if he doesn't experience his grief, he experiences anger, and it comes out like that. So many ways. It can come out in eating disorders and drinking disorders and chemical abuse. It can come out in all kinds of ways if we don't learn to face our feelings. For a person of faith, self-care centers around receiving God's care. That's what Sabbath is all about. That's what prayer is all about. Remember that Jesus' self-care meant going off on his own to pray. How many times in the Gospels do you hear about Jesus going off on his own to pray, to be with God, to be with himself, to process whatever his experiences have been that day? And he practiced the Sabbath. So these are all ways that we do this for ourselves. Now, if we don't understand our own feelings, we can more easily be overwhelmed by the feelings of others, which will often be most likely lead to a compassion fatigue. We may even it may lead to emotional hardness, bitterness, even judgment toward people in need. It's so important to understand ourselves so that we don't get lost in other people's emotional worlds. And we've talked about that in our GPS model, the P being personal, which is self-differentiation. We have to understand who we are, or we get lost in who other people are. And so that is something that we just all continue to work on, is being able to understand what's my feeling versus your feeling. What's my thoughts versus your thoughts. Now, these two stories we have, first Jesus and the woman caught in adultery, loaded with feelings. And it's funny, when you have judgment, like for instance these men and the judgment of this woman who was caught in adultery. There's nothing that says that she didn't do it. But there was a man involved in that? Where was he? That's one thing I want to know. But when people express judgment, they're expressing their own feelings of shame. And so the more they had shame, the more they expressed it as judgment on this woman. And the feelings that they had about Jesus, a feeling that he was taking away something of theirs. And so do you know how Jesus resolves this? It's interesting. If you look, watch. I don't know what the drawing in the dirt thing was, but maybe it was just a way of maybe he was writing down their sins and reminding them of what they had done. I'm not really sure, but he says, okay, so he who has no sin of his own, you can cast the first stone. And so what he made them feel the feelings that she was feeling. They weren't feeling necessarily compassion for her, but they were feeling the shame of their own sin. That's what he made them to feel. And so he used empathy in this case to diffuse the anger. Their anger was really shame in disguise. And so he brought it down to the real problem. The real problem is your shame that you now project on this woman. And so he diffuses that, and one by one, they walk away. Probably not with a lot of love in their heart for Jesus or that woman, but dealing with their own sense of failure and shame as well. And that's a good place to start, is just to be honest about what you're feeling. So here's another situation where there's a lot of feelings. Jesus and the death of Lazarus. Remember, that we feel the feelings of other people. And so Jesus, who certainly was well in tune with himself and other people, feels Martha coming at him. And Martha is angry. Now, underneath her anger is grief. It is the shock of this death. But she's angry. She says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. That's an accusation. Where were you? You let us down. You could have been here. You could have stopped this. And so Jesus feels that. And then when Jesus sees her weeping, and Mary's weeping, and she sees the Jews that came to console them, sees their weeping, he's feeling that. And it says he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. Now, what's the interesting part is that it says deeply moved, but there is a footnote in most Bibles that will let you know that the Greek word behind it is that he was angry. Now, we don't like to hear that. Why would he be angry in this situation? He should be only grieving, but grief is complicated. And you that have experienced it, you know that anger gets mixed in there. We've got a whole feelings soup going on in this scene, and it isn't just grief. He's feeling the anger, and he's responding to it as well. Hey, he's been accused of in a way, causing this because he didn't do anything to stop it. And so, feelings are complex. And he was greatly troubled. But it says, and then he says, where have you laid him? Now, Jesus knew what was going to happen. He intentionally delayed his trip, which is troubling. But so that God would be glorified, so that they would see this amazing thing that he was going to do. And maybe in his mind, he was thinking, in the end, this is all going to be great. And so, this will be fine. And so I know it's going to be fine. And he knew that. But when he approached the tomb and he saw the reality of death in this place, the feelings came up. And we have two of the most powerful words in all the Bible. Jesus wept. Jesus experienced not only the grief of other people, so sympathetically feeling their feelings, as we've been talking about, but Lazarus was Jesus' friend. Does he know that he's about to raise him from the dead? Yes. But it hurt. It hurt that his friend experienced death. It hurt that his friends were experiencing grief. And it is a great comfort for me to know that Jesus understands my feelings. It was C.S. Lewis, in his younger life, he wrote a book called The Problem of Pain. It was a very kind of theological, philosophical look at examination of pain. And it's still being used today in seminaries. We read this in seminary. And yet, he recanted that book altogether when he experienced his first major loss. Later in life, he married a woman who had a young son, and he knew when he married her that the woman was sick and that she would die. And yet he loved her, and he loved her son. And she died, and he experienced. And so he wrote a new book called A Grief Observed. And I might say a grief experienced. And he wrote these words about it. This comes from a place of understanding. No one ever told me that grief felt so like fear. I'm not afraid, but the sensation is like being afraid. The same fluttering in the stomach, the same restlessness, the yawning. I keep on swallowing. At other times, it feels like being mildly drunk or concussed. there is a sort of invisible blanket between the world and me, and I find it hard to take in what anyone says. Or perhaps hard to want to take it in. It's so uninteresting. Yet I want the others to be about me. I dread the moments when the house is empty. If only they would talk to one another and not to me. Now, he never would have known that had he not experienced it himself. Some things we really won't understand until we have experienced them. So a person that has experienced grief is better able to empathize with a person going through the grief. They have that in their mind now, and the empathy is greater. Just like when you see a movie and there's something about grief in it, you're much more likely to have tears if you have experienced your own grief. Another example is like Alcoholics Anonymous and 12-step programs. Alcoholics, this is how they're better able to help one another because they understand the experience of alcoholism. However, they're not able to be of help unless they are in recovery themselves. So it's not all about being able to commiserate with people's problems. It's important for our healthy empathy for us to experience a degree of healing in ourselves as well. Our feelings can be a great help to others as they experience their own difficult feelings, but only if we have understood and faced them and received some level of healing regarding them. That's why it's so important for, say, hospital workers or ministers to have therapy and counseling and do their own work on grief and trauma and loss in their lives so that they can use that as a source of healing for others. Otherwise, all it does is lead to compassion fatigue. It sucks us dry emotionally. I'm going to give you just a simple exercise. I've always thought, when I was writing my dissertation, I said to my advisor, can't I just write on one page, church, go see a therapist? And that'd be it. That's the best thing. If I could just say that to everybody, if you have the ability to see a therapist, see a therapist. We've all got stuff to work out. But until then, I'll give you an exercise. Maybe it'll lead to that. So here it is. It's called the feelings mirroring exercise. Most of us feel what others are feeling if we learn to pay attention to ourselves and others. And so everything I've said today, when someone expresses anger, we're going to feel it inside of us. When somebody smiles, we're going to smile. It's the same thing, and it's called mirroring. And it is a function of the neurons called mirror neurons. So over the next week, simply note how other people, whether in person or on screen, alter your feelings. Like I was having a good day until so-and-so came into my life. Recognize that those feelings are not your feelings. You are just mirroring them. It's physiological. It's natural. And then you can let those feelings go. You do not have to hold on and carry the feelings of other people in the world. If you're experiencing joy and you want to keep experiencing joy, don't let anybody take that away from you. Now, meet people in their feelings. If people are upset or angry, recognize that, validate that, commiserate with that a little bit. But don't let it become you. That's where we get lost. Let me close with a thought. If we're living in a relationship with Christ, in the way that we live in relationship to a spouse or to a mom or a dad, and they impact our emotional lives, right? That's the mirroring thing. The more we're connected to somebody, the more the mirroring is intense. And if we're that connected with Christ, He can feel how we feel, yes. But do you believe that you could feel how He feels? That you can allow His emotions to impact you? Maybe you feel sadness. What if it's Christ's sadness? Do you think He feels sadness? Of course He does. We just heard it in the story. Sometimes our anger may be His anger. And our joy could be His joy. the more deeply we attach our lives to Christ, the more our feelings will be informed by Christ rather than the environment around us, which is lost and needy and broken in so many ways. He is whole. He is our wholeness. This is our path to well-being. It is being in relationship. And then you can impact your environment by the feelings you bring into it. You could bring your peace into the room. You could bring your joy into the room. You could bring gentleness into the room. You could bring generosity into the room. You have a way to impact the world through your feelings. It could be Christ's feelings coming through you right into this world, if we're open to that. Amen.